Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So let me ask you a question. Would you ever try to build a house without first drawing up an architectural blueprint? I mean, imagine hiring a construction crew and just telling them to start pouring concrete while you run off to pick out the drapes and, the paint colors. It sounds completely ridiculous, right? Well, today we're looking at exactly that, but for the digital world. We're talking about sketching the skeleton of your app to focus purely on layout and hierarchy. Because honestly, in software development, skipping the blueprint is the absolute fastest way to derail your entire project.
Okay, just taking a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to start with the blueprint concept, then define low-fidelity wireframes, dive into layout, explore where wireframes actually fit into the bigger picture, cover some common mistakes to avoid, and finally wrap up by talking about how to test our design skeleton.
All right, let's jump straight in. Section 1, the blueprint of design. Why building without a plan is a costly mess.
Like I mentioned right at the top of the show, you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. And yet, product teams try to do this all the time. They just jump straight into high-fidelity designs, getting completely caught up in the flesh and blood of the app. You know, the colors, the typography, those beautiful high-resolution images, before they even know if the underlying bones are in the right place. Skipping that structural blueprint is a guaranteed way to create a chaotic, really expensive mess that's just going to require massive rework down the line.
Moving on to Section 2, defining low-fidelity wireframes, keeping things simple, structural, and focused.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that a wireframe is simply a low-fidelity blueprint. It's just a basic sketch of your website or your app interface that focuses purely on functionality, not the visual design. We are talking strictly about the layout, the content hierarchy, and the user's navigational flow. There are no fancy logos here, there's no branding. It is literally just the bare minimum required to see how a user actually gets from point A to point B.
Take a look at this. A low-fidelity paper wireframe is just simple boxes. Maybe an X to mark where an image is going to go, some squiggly lines for text, and basic placeholders. And honestly, this simplicity is its superpower. Because it's so quick to draw, it allows for rapid iteration. If a layout isn't working, no big deal. You just crumple up the piece of paper and sketch another one in 30 seconds. You never get bogged down or distracted by whether the primary checkout button should be, say, forest green or navy blue.
Now that we've got our foundation set, Section 3 is all about prioritizing layout and hierarchy. So how do we actually guide the user's eye without all those visual distractions? I love this quote. Francesco Improta has this great rule. The best wireframe style is no style. He points out that so many designers mistakenly think they need color on a wireframe to communicate what's important. But adding color actually breaks the conversation with stakeholders. Suddenly, instead of discussing the core user flow, you are completely trapped in these highly subjective debates about tints and shades and personal preferences.
So, if we can't use color to show what's important, what exactly do we use? Well, instead of color, we rely on functional techniques. Think about visual weight, right? Naturally, a larger box is going to draw more attention than a smaller one. Then consider placement and white space. Actually, separating content areas with empty space organically guides the user's eye right to those high-attention zones. You can also use different shapes, like rectangles versus rounded buttons, to signify actionable items. And finally, just simple typography choices. A bold, large heading versus a normal text line instantly establishes a clear visual hierarchy.
When we compare layouts side by side, notice how simply shifting the white space, the text lines, and those image boxes fundamentally changes the entire conversation. On the left, we've got a really prominent hero image spanning the whole width, followed by tightly stacked content. But on the right, the spacing is adjusted, pushing the eye down a completely different path. Without using a single drop of color, you can completely dictate how a user navigates the interface.
All right. Let's head into Section 4, wireframes, mockups, and prototypes. Understanding the evolutionary pipeline of design. Let's see exactly where the wireframe sits in the larger lifecycle of building a digital product. This step-by-step evolution really shows the journey clearly. Step 1 is our wireframe. That's the low-fidelity skeleton focusing on structure. Once that foundation is rock solid, teams move on to Step 2, which is the mockup. This is where you finally add the flesh and blood. The high-fidelity visual design, the actual colors, the fonts. And then finally, Step 3 is the prototype, the interactive muscle. This is a simulated, fully clickable version of the product that's ready for advanced user testing.
It is incredibly important to firmly contrast the function of a wireframe against a mockup. Honestly, it's super common for teams to confuse these two things. But if you prioritize high-fidelity mockups way too soon in the design process, you're going to end up wasting hours debating cosmetic details. The wireframe keeps you grounded in the user experience and the layout long before you ever have to worry about the specific hex code of your background color.
Which brings us nicely to Section 5, Common Wireframing Mistakes, the distractions that can entirely derail your project. You definitely want to avoid these common traps at all costs. The biggest one? Thinking you need to wireframe every single page. Remember, wireframing is all about speed. If you're building a shopping app, you shouldn't be sketching the About Us page right out of the gate. Start with the critical user flow, finding a product, adding it to the cart, and checking out. If you nail those essential pages, the rest will naturally follow. Also, whatever you do, don't start with the largest desktop screen size. Always start with the smallest mobile screen to force yourself to prioritize essential features, and then you scale up. And please, don't forget to use annotations. Just a few quick notes on your sketch explaining how a button functions can literally save hours of miscommunication. Lastly, never wait for the quote-unquote right time to get feedback. Feedback needs to be an ongoing conversation from your very first messy sketch. This is a crucial point to remember. Wireframing is a tool for communication. It is not a final product. Fidelity is just a sliding scale. Yes, stakeholders sometimes misread rough sketches, but a highly polished design totally distracts them. Your ultimate goal here is fast, efficient alignment to get absolutely everyone on the exact same page regarding intent and logic.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Testing Your Design Skeleton. Does testing a bunch of paper sketches actually work in the real world?
Well, yes, it does. Groundbreaking research from Leila Takayama and her team at UC Berkeley compared testing simple, sketched, low-fidelity prototypes against highly coded, high-fidelity computer prototypes. And the result? Both are equally good at uncovering usability issues. I mean, let that sink in for a second. A quick, incredibly cheap, low-fidelity paper sketch uncovers the exact same fundamental user flaws as an expensive, time-consuming, high-fidelity model.
So since we know with absolute certainty that these simple sketches save massive amounts of time, money, and valuable development resources, I really have to ask you, what is stopping you from drawing your first wireframe today? Seriously, grab a pen, grab a piece of scrap paper, ignore the colors, and just start sketching the skeleton of your next great idea. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy wireframing!